What we have here today is really, again, another powerhouse panel in terms of really thinking about how different teams across the org really work hand in hand, from UA, growth, product, creative, BI. We have them all here today. And so we get to hear firsthand from them what they're doing from day-to-day best practices as to how they're aligning against that single metric for them. Please give them a warm round of applause.
Another French accent, so sorry about that in advance. I swear, no joke about the World Cup. I was the one with Eric in the hot tub last night, so I could speak about this experience if you want. But I think we'll probably more focus on discussing with, I think, a great panel that's as well gender balance. So thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Susan, for doing that. For me, it's really important to see gender equality in mobile. I think there is great talent on both ends. And it's more and more a trend, and I hope we're going to see a lot more of that. So we're going to discuss about aligning with different internal teams. And I think all the experts we have on stage come from different scale of company, right? From a publicly traded company, LinkedIn, part of Microsoft, Lyft, where you guys are at how many employees now?
2,500.
Yeah, so it's really big team in Calm and Poshmark, right? A little bit earlier, but still you guys have definitely a lot of teams and a lot of talent, and they are leading in their space. So without further ado, I think we're going to start with a quick round of introduction. I'm terrible at names in general, and I will butcher them with my French accent, so let's start with Esther.
Hi, my name is Esther Huang. I'm a director of growth over at Poshmark. I've been there for a few years now. I help lead the paid efforts on acquisition of new users, as well as some of the organic components of new user acquisition.
Hey, I'm Ben at Lyft. I'm the director of product and growth. I lead things like acquisition, communications platforms, localization, and a whole bunch of stuff that affects getting new passengers and drivers.
Hi. My name is Jake Bailey, and I'm a digital marketing manager, senior digital manager at LinkedIn. I oversee digital marketing and strategy, and I essentially sit on what we think of as an internal digital marketing team within the company, and I oversee our brand growth and app acquisition efforts.
Hi, my name is Dun, and I lead product and growth at Calm, which is a subscription meditation app. And on my team on the growth side would be product management, design, and analytics. And on the marketing side is paid acquisition, lifecycle and email marketing, and also all our social and community efforts.
Great, thank you. So we are all in this period that's end of quarter, and so a lot of us are probably planning for either Q3, the end of the year, the next 12 months, depending of each company size. So I thought it would be interesting to start by asking you, Ben, as well as Don, essentially how you guys going about aligning with your executive team when it comes to the growth efforts, whether it's acquisition, retention, and so on, knowing that some of them might be like Dan, who is very expert in the space, but a lot of them are not necessarily expert about the growth space.
So yeah, we think about things in terms of a lot about how much risk we want to take in terms of learning and how much we know about the situation right now. So going into planning right now, we're doing things like Alok, who's going to talk later, and I are in 3-month planning, 6-month planning, and 2-year planning all simultaneously. And we have to plan out things like our plan to scale, what's our plan to learn, what are the resources we need, and what's our long-term vision that aligns with the whole company. We actually invest a lot in building a structure for how we think and disseminating that structure across the whole company so that people can be in line with how we think about this stuff.
Great.
So with Calm, we have 3 KPIs. It's purchase conversion, subscriber engagement, and subscriber renewals because we're a subscription app. And so all of the conversations come back to one of those 3 metrics, whether it's a new feature or if we want to scale budget to drive a new channel, whatever it is, it's always about, okay, how is it going to lift one of those and hopefully more than one of those metrics.
Great. And Ben, I was curious, so how do you deal with the fact that you're bringing a lot of new people in your organization? How do you make sure that the candidate and so on is really able to follow some of the templates, but as well adopt them and maybe adapt them in some case to educate the executive about new challenges you guys are facing?
So it's a really good question. Every organization is very different about how you communicate and how you convince people of different things. we actually lean very heavily on templates and just lean very heavily on things that have been done before. For my team in particular, the way that I tend to train people is to just like have them follow and have them watch. We actually do things like mock exercises. I'm trying this out right now of like actually onboarding people and having them do work that we just throw in the trash can, but work that we can actually collaborate on together and see how it goes. We'll do like practice pitches and stuff like that, just to give them a forum to try stuff out before they're under like the high pressure situation presenting in front of our CEO or something like that.
Great. Well, so executive is one thing, right? But the CFO among the executive team and the finance team at large is a critical partner or a critical roadblock sometimes, right, for the growth team. So I'll be curious to hear you, Esther, Ben, and anybody else on how do you educate the finance team? How do you align with them and make sure you understand as well their challenges, right? Yeah.
I'll go first. Good question. We actually have a finance representative that's part of our growth unit. They attend a lot of our meetings on a pretty regular basis. But if we roll back the clock to when I started at Lyft 3 years ago, I think my first product review with our CEO was just teaching him how ads worked. It's not necessarily the finance team, but it's like a day-by-day thing, and we can look at it as an evolution in terms of teaching the whole executive team piece by piece by piece every quarter more and more about how growth works. Now we have finance embedded into this whole process. So when we think about building LTV calculations and doing budget allocations, they're a big part of that. But we can only do that now because we started that education a long time ago.
Yeah, that's a great question because I think historically the relationship between finance and marketing is always a bit contentious because one is the money spender and one is the money protector. But for us, similarly, we also have a lot of frequent check-ins and meetings between the finance team and the growth team. On the growth side, we do educate finance a lot on, for example, the paid advertising side of things, how operations work. In finance's eyes, there's a lot of things that maybe doesn't make sense for what growth might be doing. So, if ROI is better on a certain platform and channel, why aren't we spending more there? The growth team knows that there's a nuance where there's a limited scale or that marginal cost is astronomical, so we keep it at a certain level. So there's the little nuances that we have to communicate. Otherwise, finance, with their kind of very straightforward way of thinking, wouldn't be able to understand why the growth ops does why they do what they do. At the same time, I think finance team is also a really great ally and not just somebody who's on the growth team all the time, because they, from their vantage point, have a really great way of looking at certain blind spots that growth team might have. For example, at Poshmark, it was the finance team that was able to point out to us the difference in LTV, very long-term LTV for our male users versus our female users, which the growth team, operating much more short-term, weren't keeping the most closest eye on. And so in that way, that's a great example of how both teams work together and were able to help each other out.
Great. Maybe LinkedIn, I'm curious, especially because more traditional organization, right? At this point, it's very mature, even if it was born in Silicon Valley. So how do you go about it, Jake?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I guess I'll take a step back. I guess hands raised, who has the LinkedIn app on their phone right now? Very good, very good. How many, one more hand raised, how many people know how LinkedIn makes money? All right, about half. Okay, so this is kind of a issue that we at LinkedIn, everyone has to understand. And what I like about LinkedIn mostly is that two things. One, we're a very members-focused company, and so everything we do is about the member and how best to serve the member. And the second thing is what I like to refer to us as a B2C to B company. And what I mean by this is we first have to get members onto the platform, and then once members are onto the platform, we can then sell recruiting services, job services, marketing services, learning services, sales services. We have all of our various verticals. And so from a finance perspective, we have to understand that full evolution of a member. And me being on kind of this growth and app acquisition side, we can't just say we're going to spend however much to get a member. Our CFO is going to say, what are you going to give me in return? And so very similar with you guys, we have finance partners that are very baked into our everyday engagement. And we also have a team called Biz Operations, and their whole existence is thinking about what happens from an LTV perspective when we bring in a member. And so we've been able to move back, and we kind of switch that B to C to B model to B to B to C. So how are we actually making money from all of our members, and back into some sort of LTV that we can then leverage when we go out and buy ads and drive apps. And like the previous panel, we're in a sense where if we can prove ROI and we can show that we're making the CFO money, he will give us unlimited funds. And so when we're able to show great progress, he's on board and the finance team is on board. So we're really excited.
Great. Well, I think, we've learned something on the finance side to really build a close partnership is embedding them in your process, probably a lot more efficient than just having touch point every quarter when you need the money. I think one last aspect that the key element of alignment, right, for all of you guys is working with engineers, and sometimes through a PM, sometimes directly, to achieve your goals of alignment. So I was curious, I think, Dan, you have like engineers that you're working closely with since you're leading product. So if you want to start on discussing how you make sure they understand your key goals and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, so just tying it back to what I mentioned before, which is just our 3 KPIs. We're fortunate to have very commercially minded engineers, and so they want to know if they're going to spend a week building a feature, they want to know what's the impact on the user experience and how does that ultimately tie back to more revenues for Calm. So we're super transparent with that, both before we ask for the feature and also to follow up afterwards. And so it's about developing that relationship with all of your engineers and make them part of the process of prioritization and feature development and requirements and all of that. So, I mean, we're a small team. We're a team of almost 40, so we can still do that. I'd be curious how bigger teams accomplish that as well.
Yeah, well, going to a little bit bigger team, right, Poshmark? So, Esther, how are you going about convincing your engineers to build something for the growth team?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think similarly, it's also a lot about building out the relationships. I think one of the very helpful precedents that was set as our VP of growth is actually an ex-engineer. So he started off as an engineer, so he has a lot of personal relationships with his former team, the engineers, and he still makes it a habit to set up, unstructured, just like meetup times with engineers, and they just, talk about whatever. It could be the Warriors game, it could be a challenge that the growth team is facing, and I think that's been proven out to be really helpful, and actually management has been really helpful in helping to continue to cultivate that kind of environment, whether it's from setting up carpool routes where people could cross-functionally like carpool home, or we installed a bar so we can have Scotch o'clock together, and I think those conversations that are again like less structured and a little bit open helps uncover solutions that, again, might not have been thought of consciously, but kind of come up naturally over time as the conversation continues. One of my favorite examples is in one of these carpool rides from our office to the South Bay. One of our engineers was talking to one of our growth folks, and the growth person was complaining about marginal costs on Facebook, but we had to allocate a certain amount to our Facebook ad budget, and the engineer kind of just very naturally came up with this idea of using Facebook social logins, which is different from Facebook Connect. It's just scraping basic Facebook information to populate your registration page as part of the registration flow. And that was a pretty easy thing to implement, and that's kind of an idea the engineer had after 3 months of talking about Facebook marginal costs. And that very low-hanging fruit actually ended up improving our registration conversion rate by 5 percentage points. So those kinds of very casual conversations between cross-functionally, I think, are very helpful and something I think we strive to maintain.
Yeah. Well, speaking of one example, I think from NGMoco days, to your point of casual conversation, I always think if you take the time for a brown bag lunch where you're like, hey, this is user acquisition, this is how we go about it. I was always surprised, even recently going to Tokyo or at NGMoco, by the number of engineers showing up who are working on super interesting issue about machine learning and news, or at NGMoco building a new game, and yet they take the time to learn in 30 minutes about user acquisition. So I don't know if, Ben, you're doing that as Lyft as well, or?
So we addressed it in two ways, probably. One was, so our growth org is pretty big. It's around 200 to 300 people now. And that meant that it wasn't just about like brown bag lunches. We actually needed to create a career pathway for engineers to be successful by working on growth and impact. So one of the first things we did when we brought in a new director of growth engineering was to change the career pathway for engineering to actually allow people to focus on impact versus like architectural amazingness. The second thing is that a lot of on the paid acquisition side especially, we're hitting limits on channels of like how sophisticated we can get manually. And we're a very regional business, as you guys know, so every region's very different. So we started just building pods. So we have a social pod, which is like an engineer, a data scientist, a PM, and a marketer. And we want the engineer to be a channel manager effectively. And it's not just about like building a really good relationship. We actually want the engineer to be a marketer. And I think that's like skipping many, many steps in a lot of ways, and like really empowering the engineer to have metric ownership.
Great. Well, and one of the other challenge that some of you guys may have, right, is aligning with other marketing teams. So it's like savvy people, they're doing a job that's very similar. And I think, Jake, you have that at LinkedIn, right? It's not like one marketing team and essentially all of them are aligned with the same KPIs, but it's many, many groups. So I was curious how you're going about aligning with those guys and making them understand your challenges in the app space.
Totally. Yeah, it's a great question. And as you scale, you're definitely going to run into these more siloed teams in the marketing space. And so everyone's going to be going after similar people or similar messaging. And you have to find kind of one way to bring those together. Luckily, we have been able to create essentially the team that I sit on now. And this is a horizontal team that essentially gets to look at all the different business lines that go on at LinkedIn. And like I said before, we're kind of an internal digital agency. And that allows us to kind of leverage what is working in one team and push that to another team. But the one thing that makes that really difficult is everyone has different KPIs, right? And so this has taken us quite a while to get to this place. But what we've been able to do is get to essentially a return on advertising spend KPI from a digital marketing perspective. And so each team, every week, we meet with the executive staff and go through the various lines of business to understand our return on advertising spend. Going back to that kind of B to C to B business, we've been able to put LTVs against all of these different business lines, but that return on advertising spend is one metric that we can all speak to. And when I talk to my person who runs our marketing solutions business where people can advertise on LinkedIn and they have a particular ROI, but maybe they are running out of inventory for people to actually purchase on LinkedIn, they're going to come to our team and say, how can we drive more app downloads? How can we drive growth? And so then it allows us to really work together to grow the business as a whole, as opposed to being in these very specific silos, going after our very specific KPIs. That horizontal view and that one KPI on ROAS and LTV is really helpful.
Great. And Ben, at Lyft, you guys have big offline efforts, right, beyond the online. So how do you make sure essentially that when there is an impact on conversion rate, click-through rate, or all those other metrics you're looking at, how do you make sure that you truly understand what they're doing and build joint efforts versus something very siloed, especially given the scale, right, of the team?
Yeah, do you want me to go into offline in terms of like people on the ground that are doing recruiting or like the brand side of?
More like the brand side, right?
Okay, yeah. So I guess who here has huge brand dollars that they don't control at their company? Yeah. Hey, Luke. So as you guys can imagine, you guys do, for sure, right?
We do.
Yeah, we have huge brand dollars that we do not control so it's like different organizations, and that's a gigantic challenge for us, for sure. And there's two ways of looking at it. One is we could try to like align our roadmaps, but every time we do that, that sort of fails, and it's just like a short-lived effort. It all comes down to agreeing upon goals, actually. Like, we need to agree upon that the goal is in 2 years to maximize the growth of the company, or something like that. And if you do that, then it becomes a little bit easier to sequence how we do things. Brand tends to like to do like the most efficient way of buying brand, which is nationally. But if you're trying to get really, really good at measurements, we probably care more about local spend on brand. And that means that we really need to align our goals. And if our goal is to learn how to grow the company as quickly as possible in like 2 years from now, that might mean that we need to make an investment decision that's very inefficient in the short term so that we can learn faster in the long term. And that really means we just need to align on goals and align on just like how we think about strategy. The other piece is actually relationships, for sure. We have to invest in relationships with the brand team very, very closely. Because if we don't, then we just end up diverging, converging.
Great. Well, and another element, right, beyond your brand team that's buying media and so on, is aligning with your sometimes creative team or brand director or somebody with a very strong creative sensibility and cares about the brand, but doesn't necessarily understand the quantitative side. So I think I was curious to see how you guys are going about it at Poshmark and then, at Calm as well, knowing that the structure size is a little bit smaller, but you could still have people very passionate and protecting the brand and essentially that don't want to engage with quantitative side. Or maybe not, and then it's great.
I don't think Poshmark has too big a problem with because everybody is under the marketing team, and we're not, our whole company is 200 people, so we don't have a issue of us being like too spread out. We work pretty closely with each other. It's kind of the same answer as I had with the engineering. We really invest in a lot of our personal relationships, so we're able to understand. And also, I think one specific aspect that's bridging the teams together is, for example, like the paid growth team will take on certain projects that help understand pain points that maybe other teams might have. One example I have specifically is like the paid growth team has been taking on more and more influencer budget. And that's, while still under paid growth, a very different world from, Facebook ads. And that's a nice in-between where you're able to understand, like, okay, this isn't purely like, this is the CTR, and this is what your cost per reg came out to. There is a lot more like, brand and like people management to take into consideration. So I think those particular projects were, as more growth engines become a blend of both brand and just like pure paid performance marketing, I think helps bridge the gap between teams like that.
Right. And you feel overall like finding designers to join the team that understand that they will have to follow, those metrics and understand them is relatively easy, or how do you test that?
With designers specifically, so we have on the paid growth team, we have designers that are dedicated to growth. They're growth production designers. So, these are creative people that sit on a very analytical team. And in order to be able to make sure they have a stake, we make sure we empower them to be independent so that we could utilize their, their unique creative abilities, while at the same time having their goals aligned with our KPIs. So, for example, one tactic we have been using to be able to have growth designers and channel managers communicate more easily is using detailed imagery tagging. For example, if this ad on Facebook would be detailed, would have very detailed tagging. For example, it would have a picture of shoes. Those shoes would be red. This is the brand of those shoes. This is the model of those shoes. This is what the copy said. So having very detailed tagging makes things, for one, less objective, so that the growth team can understand and have like very tangible points to communicate to the creative team, hey, this is what's been working for us. This is what we need to reiterate on. And at the same time, the growth team has been good about educating the creative team about these are the KPIs, so like very high level. It doesn't have to go into super details, but like these are the cost per registrations that we try to shoot for these specific segments. And I think that level of information empowers, again, the creative team to do what they do best, which is use their creative energy to come up with things that the growth team definitely cannot come up with.
Great.
For us, it was really hard to align creative with UA. There were always just way too many opinions on what ads we should launch and why, and most of it not founded on data. So what we found was most effective to help us move faster was just to empower the UA directors to lead the creative aspect as well and give them the design resources on their team to execute on their vision. And that way, again, we can move faster. It's more based on data. And we're not so precious about the brand. And for us, it's worked really well, and we'll continue down that path of just splitting marketing designers from product design.
Great. And I was curious, and anyone could chime in. Yeah.
So we tried to approach this about 6 months ago or 9 months ago, and we did a really bad thing, which was we gave the marketing team and the creative team a goal to replace all creative every 4 weeks with like winning creative on both sides. So both sides had incentives to basically find winning creatives and get it like fully replaced on Facebook 100% every 4 weeks. And what ended up happening was they just started cranking out huge amounts of creative, which is like a net positive thing. But the downside was we found out they were just like cutting a lot of corners on analyzing this stuff. And we started rolling out creatives that weren't actually that amazing, just so that we could like have its OKR say that's like 100%. So I generally like extreme measures because it forces change fast. But that type of approach was like too extreme probably.
No, to rebound on that, right, a question I have for you guys is we saw Google UAC automating creative, right? They pair a bunch of assets together. We saw Facebook, like a lot of the big buyers on Facebook using programmatic ads, pulling from their feed. So do you guys feel that, pure like designers, even if they understand performance, will be around 2 or 3 years from now outside of the App Store assets? I mean, in terms of building ads. Or do you feel at some point we will get to a point where designers will be irrelevant due to the advance in machine learning technology? And
I think designers will probably be taking on more of a strategy role rather than just like a pure operations role as we go forward. I mean, we definitely can't say they're going to be like replaced by like UAC and like bots and AI. I think especially their line of work has a specific like a nuance or a creativity that like can't exactly be automated, at least not for the next few years. So I think they would probably more likely be taking on more of a strategic role rather than less of a more operations role.
Good.
I mean, I think it'll be kind of the opposite actually. We will automate most of our bidding and budgeting and that type of routine management eventually, but we'll never automate the formation of a hypothesis of like, there's a segment, the segment cares about this thing. We should analyze that segment, come up with a creative strategy to win that segment and test it out. So we actually are thinking the complete opposite direction. Like marketers and creative designers should work more closely on creative in the long term.
So UA manager will be automated first before before the designers.
I mean, it's much harder to automate creativity than it is to automate like, analyzing an experiment and calling it, So.
And you've seen it at Wish already. I don't know if you guys have been following what's been going on at Wish, but they've been able to automate a lot of their traditional UA capabilities just with engineering.
Well, the last team we haven't covered in terms of team alignment, but they are really important, and that's even in the name of the conference, is like BI analytics. So I was curious in terms of both the setup. Do you guys have like merged those two groups, like roles in BI, or are they still separated in your respective companies? And then, are you working with those guys, especially if it's another team, to make sure they understand your challenges and they are following through on it and not like planning for months a change when you need it now? Wants to start? It's pretty much all of you guys. So
yeah, I'll jump in. What we've realized over the last couple of years, and UA, mobile UA specifically, is fairly new at LinkedIn, but just incorporating business analytics into your process early is the key to success, is what we found, especially at a larger company. If you have one-off projects with your business analytics partners here and there, things are going to get deprioritized, and it's not going to come back to you. And so what we've realized is you have to incorporate a very core team from the get-go. And at LinkedIn, we're almost 12,000 employees, so a very large company. But our app acquisition team, we actually have split off. We call it Activations. And this is a full team with a PM, engineering managers, designers, marketing, paid, but it's very small. We're maybe less than 20 people. And all the numbers that you actually need. So my big takeaway is include them early and include them often, and that team can really, for us, it's really the core of the team. Without them, nothing else would exist. So making sure that they're part of it is really important.
Yeah, so we don't have BI at Lyft. We have data science. We have data engineering. BI actually refers to like the whole BI infrastructure, I guess. So data science is hugely important to each channel for us, especially as we start to automate and build programmatic whatever, because they're the people that are building the models. So they're arguably the most important part of the pod when you're starting to automate Facebook. They are the person making the actual model and algorithm, working with the engineer or the marketer to translate logic into model. That being said, we also believe that every marketer should be able to write SQL queries, and they should be able to do their own insights and their own analytics. But even then, that really means that like you need a really solid data foundation to even do that insight. So, I mean, that whole group is super important to work together. But we want everyone to be able to access data and to use data to like drive insights.
So similarly, we also have our BI team is a mix of the data science team and then the data engineering team, and with the support of the growth team. And I think that kind of nebulous structure actually works out for us, just given the smaller size of our team so far, because we are able to do kind of one-off projects and things that need to be turned around quickly. Like one example right now is our data engineers are working with my team, the growth team, to play around with attribution rules. And that is not something that you do once and then forget about. We definitely have to revisit it, maybe change everything back because it didn't work out. The data science team has to step in and say why they think it didn't work or it did work. So the BI team for us is, I think, a little unique, but I guess similar to Lyft in that it's its own like unique little world and its own like internal team that's very cross-functional. So.
Ditto. Yeah, so we're pretty small, so we don't have a separate function. So it's really data analysts working on each individual project and with each team.
Great. Well, integration, right, seems to be the common theme, whether it's around like a product like app, right, or around the essentially consumer, right? So we're all trying to have more customer centricity and integrate. Before we open to questions from the audience, I just wanted to ask you guys one last question. If you had like one key recommendation for someone in the audience for H2, could be a channel, could be a tool, beyond Singular, of course, you guys are recommending Singular, what would that be?
So I can start. The channel that I'm most excited about is TV. Up until this point, we've been spending almost all of our money on the same channels that everyone in this room probably is very familiar with, so the Facebook, the UAC, ad networks. And this January, we kicked off TV advertising, starting with remnant inventory, and now starting to scale into more of the prime inventory. And it's paying back as well as Facebook. And that's just based on spot analysis, which is just looking at the 5-minute window right after a TV spot airs and just looking at your downloads lift above baseline. And so it's already paying back well based on that. And we're also seeing halo effects on both our other paid channels and also on organic. It's called the drag factor. So we're super excited to scale that. There haven't been many apps that have done it. There have been some games. So I think it's still pretty early in the industry, especially when it comes to measurement, attribution, and how does that tie back to your other channels and et cetera. But it's been strong for us so far.
Cool.
I guess I'll say what I'm most excited about, and the team, our team here has a great like H2 plan, and they're going to execute really well against that. But what I'm really excited about is kind of this post-install event piece. Where all these networks are going to the UAC model or the Facebook model where they can build lookalike audiences based on whatever event that you feed them. And the companies who are going to have the best LTV models, the best post-install events that can feed back into these networks are the ones that are going to really be successful. And I hope no one from Google is here, but UAC is still quite crappy. But I know it's going.
I agree.
Yeah, I know it's going to get better, and I know all the other networks are going to continue to build that direction. So I think if you can get in now and understand really how LTVs work and your post-event or post-install events can play into it, those are the companies that are really going to get ahead.
From an exciting perspective, I think we're most excited about understanding how channels interact with each other, probably. So we're investing very deeply in data science and attribution. From an advice perspective, I'll give really boring advice to the group, which is do fewer things, but do them well. Because most companies, us included, end up doing like way too many acquisition channels, and it just becomes impossible to maintain, and you get so headcount constrained. So we're even trying to like pull back and focus deeper on certain things.
I also think UAC is crappy. I said that in front of a bunch of Google specialists the other night. For me, what's exciting is thinking about our growth engines beyond paid growth. So for example, thinking about partnerships with maybe publishers that have already proven out for us. One of the things an example of something that's coming out for Poshmark later this year is something called a SnapKit, which I think we're like one of the first people on it. But for example, on Snapchat, which again for us as a paid channel has really proven out, and we want to keep spending there. But what can we do with Snapchat beyond just paid ads on Snapchat? One of the things was a SnapKit, which is now later this year you'll be able to tag your clothes back to your Poshmark closet in your snaps, and that's kind of a example of integrating with partners that we know work, and we want to continue to expand the relationship just beyond more budget in a way to reach that particular audience in a kind of more holistic way.
Great. Well, TV, same thing for me. In Japan, we spent 10 million last quarter. It's like amazing uplift on the online marketing, and it drove like a lot of new users, mostly female users outside of Tokyo, to the app. We're actually staying and becoming news readers through, I guess, a coupon product originally. And so for me, that was really a revelation that you could get, new type of users through TV. And so Japan, I think, for the last 5 years, a lot of non-gaming apps have been advertising as well. So I'm glad that in the US, you're seeing good success as well. Great. Well, we have a few minutes to take at least like 2 or 3 questions from the audience. Okay. First one in the front.
This question is for Don. So I'll use the Calm app. I think it's awesome what you did with the fireplace and the book reading at nighttime. It's awesome.
Great.
Thank you. And my question for you, you talked about TV. Are you guys implementing a connected TV strategy in conjunction with in-app brand video with like maybe a call to action?
What do you mean by connected TV?
So targeting IP addresses when someone's watching TV in-house and then serving them an ad if they're connected to the IP address to their mobile device or tablet.
So we're not doing that yet. That's definitely on the roadmap. It's a bit more complicated because you have to go directly to the Comcast and Time Warners of the world. And from what I understand, there's not an ad network that's been able to aggregate those relationships. So far, we are just doing remnant and starting to bid for some premium discounted. So we're still early in our journey. I know the connected TV, that's kind of the buzzword now, but I really can't speak to how well it works.
Just so you know, you could do it without the big TV broadcasters.
Oh, okay.
And UAPI does it.
Oh.
But we're not a network. And yes, we should.
Like, okay. Unprompted as well. Great. Other questions? Sorry. No? Everything was super clear. One more in the middle. 1 time, 2 times.
This is Toby Rusing from Facebook. For Jake and Esther, who said Google UAC is crappy, can you expand on that? Tell us what you mean.
Yeah, so as probably most of everyone knows, UAC is kind of the intro to Google's grand plan to use machine learning to kind of automate most of the advertising platform on Google. And UAC kind of gets to aggregate YouTube and Play Store, search, display. What we've found is we have almost zero reporting control, and every time we want to make some sort of change, it takes weeks and weeks for the machine to learn, and it ends up spending a lot of our money, and we just don't know what's happening. So like I said, there's a lot of things that they're working on, and I know this will get better, but the transparency issue with Google has been, again, really, really crappy.
Yeah, my answer is similar. There's a lot of control you lose when you use UAC, whether it's less visibility on creatives, less visibility on placement. So I think that's frustrating for a lot of people. I mean, automation is great, but I think most people want to automate it on the advertiser side rather than on the publisher side. I compare UAC to like subprime mortgages back in 2008, when you mix it up, like when you mix up like the lowest quality mortgages with the better quality stuff, and then you just put it all in a bag and then you just like give it to somebody. So it's just a foreboding.
Great analogy.